Hello and welcome to this interview episode of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. With me, John Cripwell.
And me, Becky Brown.
Yeah, I am joined today by Becky because who you will know from our usual After Maths episodes that go out every Friday. But Becky, you're not usually here for the interview episode, so that might give an indication we're going to do something slightly different today. We are basing this whole episode around the dreaded SATs word, I'm afraid. So this episode is going to be talking all about how we can help Year 6 teachers to prepare children for the end of Key Stage 2 tests, to give them their correct name, and what we can be doing now as we record this in January, and how that might change, I suppose, in the months leading up to the tests in May. Whether you are a Year 6 teacher, a maths lead, or just somebody interested in maths in general, I think in terms, I don't know if you agree, Becky, but in terms of primary school curriculum and primary school education, sometimes it feels like SATs are just down to the Year 6 teacher. Occasionally, I think it can feel a little bit like that when you are there in Year 6. But actually, we need to remember, don't we, that it's a Key Stage 2 test, not a Year 6 test. And indeed, you know, all the work that goes on from nursery all the way through to that end point at the end of primary school all sort of counts in that journey, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a culmination, isn't it, of a lot of years of maths learning. If you think where children are when they first come to school and the massive amount of learning they do, it can feel the pressure is very much on, I think, when you are in Year 6. But even if you look at the content, a lot of the content of those tests is from domains from Years 3, 4 and 5 as well. So it's not just down to the Year 6 teacher.
No, and I think that's one of the things that we can certainly talk about, is how little of the content, certainly in past papers, has actually come from Year 6, the Year 6 curriculum. But yeah, so it can. I just to set the context a little bit. I spent about 11 years all in total, I think, teaching in Year 6 or mixed Year 5 and 6 classes. So yeah, I've been through the old SATs mill a few times in the old format, when we used to have, can you remember the tapes with the mental maths questions and the level 6 papers as we used to have them?
Oh yes, that level 6 paper.
Yeah. Some of those questions I couldn't answer myself, let alone giving them to the children. And then obviously the change in 2014 to the new style SATs with the arithmetic paper, which I'm sure we will talk about the impact that has had on, teaching in general in primary school maths, but I think Year 6 in particular, actually, the way that the system has been organised, and the impact that the arithmetic paper in particular, I think, has had has been enormous. So what we want to do is to have some really clear takeaways and useful things, whether you are in Year 6 or not, in terms of being aware of because lots of teachers support children as well, don't they? Who, even if you're not the Year 6 teacher, you might be doing some boosters or some catch up, or just offering a little bit of extra support to the Year 6 classes. So don't feel that this episode isn't for you if you are not a Year 6 teacher, I think is what I was trying to say there. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the Primary Maths Podcast on whatever platform you listen on, or even better, find us on all of them and subscribe on each of them. We really do appreciate that. And if you are watching this on YouTube, do leave us a comment with your top SATs tips, please, particularly for maths. We would appreciate those too.
Absolutely. Yes. I think I only did 1 year since 2014, actually, John, just going back to what you were saying. I think most of my SATs teaching was in the old format, which makes me feel very old indeed. However, have often been involved in, as you said, intervention and booster groups as well. And most of my teaching was in year 6 and where I most enjoyed it, probably due to the content, which is probably the opposite to you. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I did enjoy the content side of things. I enjoyed teaching in year 6 enormously. And it was probably that thing that we talk about a lot on the podcast, which is, the relationships with the pupils and the fact that they were generally able by the end of year 6 to acclimatise to my sense of humour and mild sarcasm, which was lost on some of the younger year groups. So I really did enjoy teaching in year 6, and preparing those pupils for secondary school and beyond. I think it's a real privilege to be in that situation. So, Becky, I know that you have prepared some questions. So for this interview episode, it's going to be a little bit of a discussion between Becky and I, and a little bit of Becky interviewing myself, actually. So shall we kick off with your first one?
Absolutely. It's lovely to be on the other side of the table for once, John.
I'm not sure that I agree. We'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yes, yeah. So I think, so we're in January now. And I think probably most year 6 teachers will fit in 2 camps at this point of the year. They either will have started September with the idea of what was coming at the end of the year and very much started dripping things in from then. And I think there are also a lot of teachers who might have tried to keep that first autumn term, I don't know normal is the right word, but as normal as possible. So from this point in the year then, because we can't go back in time, and I think either of those approaches will work in different ways, but from now, what would be your main priorities for preparing for those all-important tests?
So at this point in January, I think at this point in January, I think we've got about 70 teaching days before the test week, which sounds like a lot, but we know it really isn't, and there's still a huge amount to cover, isn't there, in the curriculum? So I think my first point would be that we still need to continue teaching the year 6 curriculum, because that's really important, and there's lots of things in the year 6 curriculum that will come up in the papers. So when we're thinking about the arithmetic paper in particular, multiplying fractions is usually quite an easy mark to get, because if you understand how it works and you're aware of the procedure, it's relatively easy to do those things. Then things like long division. I mean, how long could you potentially spend teaching long division? I could probably have spent 70 days just teaching long division, to be honest, Becky. So, and then, the other work on fractions and then ratio and all those things that still need to be covered before the test week. So I think continuing to teach the curriculum, continuing to have high quality maths lessons is really important. One of the things that I know lots of year 6 teachers will focus on, and probably already have been doing, is the arithmetic paper, because we know that of the 3 papers that the pupils will sit, 2 reasoning papers, 1 arithmetic paper, those give 110 marks altogether. We know often we don't know exactly what the benchmark will be for the age expected sort of criteria, but we know that it's usually around 55, 60, something around that number of marks. If there's 40 marks available in the arithmetic paper, then you know that if you can get sort of 35 plus, then you're well on your way, aren't you, to getting that magic age-related expectation. I think it's worth saying at this point that we know that this isn't the be-all and end-all, is it, of a child's education at school. It can just feel like that when you are in the middle of it, and when you know that you as a teacher are potentially being judged on this, and the school is being judged on it as well. And, we know that outcomes at Key Stage 2 do feature in head teachers' performance management, and just the way that the school is viewed. Those outcomes are really important. But what they don't necessarily have a huge impact on is the child's next steps in education, because we also know that when they go off to secondary school, often they will be given a CAT test or some other benchmark in year 7. And although their progress might be measured against that end of Key Stage 2 outcome, it isn't necessarily defining of their next steps in their education. And one thing I always used to say to the pupils and to the parents is, when I was in year 6, is that, you know, in all my years applying for different jobs and things, nobody has ever asked me what I got. Actually, Becky, I'm too old to have done the SATs. I didn't do the SATs. They came in a year or two after I left. But nobody asks for your SATs results at a job interview, do they? Nobody's interested. Um,
No,
they're not something that stays with you in the same way that potentially A-level or GCSE results do.
that's it. It's a
So
stepping stone, isn't it, to the next
exactly,
stage.
yeah. And if you have a bad day, that's okay, because, you know, your teachers at secondary school will recognise that actually you're a very capable mathematician. And I'm sure we've all taught those pupils who we know in the class on the day absolutely get it and can do the independent tasks and the work and things. And yet when it comes to a test, maybe sometimes they're absolutely fine, and then just they have a bad day. You know, we're working with people, aren't we? With children, small humans, and
Yeah.
you know, that things happen.
My own
And we
my own
can't control that.
youngest yeah, my own youngest, bless him, both of my children are very good at maths, luckily for them, but was terribly, terribly ill all through SATs week, really ill with an awful ear infection, and on the day of the maths 2 of the maths papers, literally went into school, did his tests, and came back home again. He did fine. He probably might have done better if he hadn't been ill, but it has in no way affected how he's got on at a secondary school. So it's like you say, you have to remember that these are people. We're not just
Yeah,
data, and these things happen.
exactly. And we're in the business of educating. So all of that to say that those children still deserve a broad education, and that's, you know, year 6 can't just become purely about that 1 week in May or those 4 days in May, when they sit some tests. All of that said, we know that it's still a huge pressure point for the teacher. So for me, I'm just thinking about the ways that we can minimise the impact on the pupils, but still make sure that they're completely prepared to sit the tests in May, that they feel confident about them, that they know what's coming, even if they don't know the exact questions, because that is cheating. And that you know, you can feel confident as a teacher that you've done everything that you can to prepare them for that step in their education. So, as we were saying, I would say continue with your main teaching, but um, what my approach used to be that we wouldn't even mention SATs in September or October. What we would do is a sort of benchmark test in kind of the first week back in the second autumn term, where we would just have a look to see where are we at this point in time. Now, as we say, we can't go back and do that now. We're talking about this in January. If that's not happened, it's not, you know, I'm not saying that that's what has to happen, but why that doing a benchmark test at some point is useful, just so you can see where do we need to focus our attention on, and it's definitely not indicative of final outcomes at that point. I used to see a huge improvement over the next few months, as we began to focus on closing some of those gaps and filling in some of those blanks that obviously the children had. But I think the easiest place to do that, as we've sort of alluded to, is on the arithmetic test originally, because a
So
lot of that is things that we should have already done.
So would you use past papers then, John, as a way to identify what you need to work on?
Yeah. So again, this is one of the things that you probably can't, you still could do now. But again, I used to say at the start of the year to parents, because we had some very engaged parents who wanted to help their children do the best that they could, and were, very engaged in their education, which was great. Not all the parents, but a lot of them were fantastic. I used to say to them, please don't feel tempted to go and do past papers. There's nothing to be gained by that at this point anyway. If we feel that, your individual child might benefit from a little bit more practice nearer the date, then we'll be in touch and help you with that. But you definitely don't want them sat at home, do you, going over past papers, reams of past papers. I'm not sure that's
Mhm.
helpful for anybody's confidence but also, I wanted to use those, and I wanted them to be indicative of actually, where the pupil was at that point in time. I didn't want them to have already seen them and had a go at them before. So I did used to point them out to some other places, if they were adamant that they wanted to do a little bit of practice, fine. There's a fantastic website called Twinkle that you can sign up, and there's some brilliant resources on there. And by the way, we will signpost to some of those later, because there genuinely are some fantastic resources that we can use, and I used to use. But I would ask them to stay away from using the actual past papers, because you can get those free online, download them and use them. All the mark schemes are there. The threshold tables are there so that you can do your conversions from your raw score to your scaled score, see where you are and things. And we would do a full set of those over a couple of weeks in November, just to see where we were. And again, you could do a question level analysis on that and see where the gaps were. Because, as I say, particularly for the arithmetic test, a lot of that you've already covered. If you look at the first couple of pages of an arithmetic paper, most of it is year 3, 4 level questions, really. So not only is it almost a nice little confidence boost in that it's something that the children are very familiar with and they've seen before, hopefully you've been doing these sorts of questions in some sort of fluency part of a lesson, throughout Key Stage 2. So it should be a relatively easy win. And then typically you might start then looking for misconceptions, could be around order of operations as a common one, or even, those really straightforward looking questions at the start of the paper that we've talked about many times. It might be something like 1001 take away 999. We're looking to see, are pupils using a formal written method for that, or are they able to recognize that it's just a difference of 2? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And starting to just address those maybe at the start of lessons. So what I would do with that question level analysis, certainly for the arithmetic paper, is just start to put those opportunities to practice those things in at the very start of the lesson, where we'd be doing our fluency part of the lesson. And then probably once a fortnight, I would use something like the practice papers that we've got on Twinkle. They do half length practice papers on Twinkle, or there's also you can find questions by question type as well. So if I know that we really need some practice on multiplication, long multiplication, then maybe once a fortnight between now and May, I'd be spending 20 minutes maybe just doing a set of those sorts of questions, whether that's a half practice paper or some particular question strand. I think you have to be careful that you don't spend too long just doing past papers, because although it's helpful for them to recognize what the papers look like and how to do it, and the other thing that it's helpful for is building up a little bit of stamina, because we also know that, certainly I used to recognize that when I did that first baseline test in November, probably only 2/3 of the class actually finished the paper. Maybe it was less than that, maybe it was only half. But by the time we got to May, because they knew how long it took to do and how quickly they had to work and things, much more of the class were actually finishing the papers, which was really important. But if you spend too long doing past papers, you don't actually get to teach anything, do you? So
Yeah,
it's that balance.
we know, don't we, that practicing something doesn't necessarily make you better at it. It might fine-hone your skills a bit, but it's not going to teach it to you. So that's important too. So when you do these tests, John, I think this might be a bit of a difference between, for example, GCSEs. I think if you do a GCSE past paper, you very definitely would spend time in the class going through that paper with the children. I don't think that necessarily happens in all Year 6 classrooms. Would you advocate for doing that or not?
Absolutely, yeah. I don't see I don't want to come over too strongly here, but my personal opinion, I don't see, if you just do the test and you don't go over it, then the only benefit to the pupils is that they've seen the test and had a go at it. And as you say, that's practice, but it doesn't necessarily have an impact. I think what's I did used to dedicate a couple of lessons to going through the papers, and it wouldn't just be me standing at the front saying, "Okay, the answer to question 3 is 27 or whatever." It would be, work in pairs, have a look at your partner. How did they get to that? How did they get to that answer? What did you do? Did you do the same thing? All the things that you would do in good teaching in terms of,
Hmm.
having opportunities for discussion, doing some problem solving, comparing answers, seeing what's the same and what's different. And then as the teacher, actually pulling that together and saying, okay, well, here's the question on the board. This is one that lots of us seem to struggle with. What is it about this particular question? Is it because we haven't covered it yet? In which case, everybody relax. Don't worry about it. We're going to cover that in a couple of weeks' time. You don't need to worry about it. Or is it something that actually the maths is quite easy, but trying to figure out what you need to do is a little bit harder? And therefore, can we go over some ways that we might approach doing that? So for me, I don't know about you, Becky, but for me, it's really important that even if you don't go through every question in the paper, it's really important to spend some time doing that, because otherwise children don't see the benefit of
Yeah,
doing all these past papers.
I completely agree. I think it's a bit like the argument of sitting marking lots of books in a cold classroom late into the evening is not anywhere near as powerful, is it, as doing marking alongside children or talking to them. So another thing that I used to notice by going through papers is that children would realize when they had done something, like, for example, when it says in nice bold writing, tick 2, and they had only ticked 1, things that you learn from doing tests or test techniques. So do you teach specific test technique as well in there, John? Are there certain things that you teach the children to do that sort of helps them to prepare for tests generally, not necessarily about the maths content?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think one of the things about doing the past papers, as I've already alluded to, was the timing. So having it, knowing that you are against the clock, is a very different feeling for some children, and it can add that pressure, can't it? So being able to read the clock for a start is useful, and knowing how long you've got, and knowing that generally the questions take a little bit longer to answer as you go through the paper. Certainly for the arithmetic paper, typically the last couple of questions are 2-mark questions, and they need a little bit longer. So you know that you need to leave some time to get to those. So not staying stuck, it was one of my big things, because again, in those early practice papers, you would see children, they're not finishing the paper because they're spending, far too long stuck on a particular problem that they don't know how to answer. It's only worth 1 mark. Don't worry about it. Come back to it, leave it, come back to it later. Give it some thinking time, but if you're not sure or you can't figure it out, leave it and come back. Another bugbear of mine used to be where you would have maybe just one question on the page, and clearly they'd left a lot of room on that page for working out, or for doing some drawings, or all those fantastic pictorial representations that we've been learning about for years now. That there was space to do that on the page, and some pupils were really, really reluctant to actually apply the things that they would normally do in lessons. So again, modeling that, and saying, you've got all this space to use. Why do you think that's been left there? Often there's a little clue, isn't there, in the mark, in the how it's been laid out, that this might be a question that you might want to draw something for, or you might want to make some notes on, or work in a systematic way, and that sort of thing. What I used to not necessarily do was sort of the rucksack approach to word problems and things like that. I'm not saying that that's completely unuseful, but I think it probably didn't help as much as we would have liked it to have helped, and
Yeah.
therefore having a process like that wasn't necessarily helpful. Um, so in terms of test technique, the other thing, I suppose, is looking at the number of marks available. And, if it's a 3-mark question, you know that if you've only done one calculation, that's probably not the answer that you're looking for. The other thing is checking the sensibleness of your answers as well. Is that actually if I'm finding change from a £10 note and I've got £12 something change, is that actually sensible for me to write down? And then basic test things like putting your answer in the box is, basic
Yeah.
stuff, isn't it? That for many years at primary, maybe they've not had to worry about so much.
No,
But
and
we know that you have to do that in a particular way. What to do with remainders, um, whether you need to simplify fractions, which most of the time you don't. So if you come up with a fraction that's not simplified, you've got 3/15 or whatever, you can just leave it as three
leave it.
fifteenths. You don't need to do the next step where you might make an error, or it might just take a little bit of time or whatever.
Yeah,
So
I
those
think
those sorts of things are important. And again, on the Twinkle website, there's a whole PowerPoint about different test techniques and things that tips for getting through the maths SATs paper
yeah.
that you can go through with the class if you need to.
I think you can sometimes feel like that the tests are there to trick you in some way, but they're really not. I mean, I did all the training to be a Key Stage 2 SATs marker once upon a time. Won't say too much about it. I didn't actually go through with it because I broke my ankle.
Oh,
I wasn't able to do it. But
oh, do,
I
do you
think
need your ankle to mark papers? How many papers do you have
I
to
mean,
mark at one time? Is this?
I needed to not be in hospital was
Okay,
the issue.
fair
Yeah,
enough.
I mean, most people break their ankle and don't spend 2 weeks in hospital, but
No,
I like to be extreme.
you
Um,
wanted the bed
so
rest. That's fine.
yeah, and I think what that made me realise was actually the markers are on your side. If you're showing that you can do the maths, they're not. It's not trying to trick you. It's just trying to test what you know. It's not a trick. Um, but yeah, certainly things like putting things in the right place. I think children often, because they're so used to having photocopies, I think getting that lovely, fresh, new blue printed version, I think they're frightened sometimes. Always said to my year sixes, I expect to see jottings all over this. Just do it like
Yeah,
any other
yeah.
paper. But I think it's new and it comes out of the packet in front of their eyes and it's all, I think that can send your brain into
Well,
doing
this
some
is
strange
so.
things.
I used to have this argument with our office each year. Um, I used to actually photocopy the papers myself because of wanting to make sure it was right. Now, don't get me wrong, I am very much in favour of sustainability and not wasting paper and things like that. And I would take out any of the blank pages and things that were in there, so I was making sure that we're not photocopying blank pages. But I do think it's really important, both for maths and for the reading paper, actually, that the pupils see the papers in the size that they are. Sometimes schools attempted to reduce the size of the booklets to A5 or whatever, so that it uses less paper. And I understand that budgets are tight. We don't want to waste paper. And it did used to frustrate me sometimes when you would have piles and piles of past SATs papers around the classroom. It's like, gosh, all that paper. It's not wasted, is it? It's part of their learning and their education.
Yeah.
But in the maths papers, you've got things that you might have to measure or to draw, or just room that you need to work things out, and you want them to have a sense of how much room they have on the actual papers. So having a reduced size booklet, I think, can give a false sense of the
Mhm.
amount of work that you need to do. And for I know this is the maths podcast, but for reading papers as well, the amount that you had to write to get the mark, if it was leaving half a page or whatever on an A4 booklet, that's quite a lot more than half a page on an A5 booklet. Thinking about scale, so I think it's important from that sort of in terms of preparedness, to have actually seen the full size booklets and make
Yeah.
sure that they're as accurate as they can be. I wouldn't bother doing them in colour, but yeah, just thinking about you mentioning the nice blue
Yes.
booklets. But yeah,
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't worry about doing them in colour, but it's certainly good to see them full size, and to be as familiar with them as possible, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. And I think again, we're talking about maths, but thinking about the reading booklet, sometimes the use of colour on those can be quite helpful. So it's not just
Yeah,
about
yeah.
say, oh, you're right, we don't want to keep printing lots of things out, but just something to consider.
No,
So we
certainly
talked a
for
little,
the actual texts themselves in the reading book,
yeah,
and of course you don't have to send the last year's texts away or anything. Hopefully, you've kept those somewhere. We used to have cupboards full of past SATs paper
yeah,
texts and things, but if you haven't got them, you can download those free as well from the DFE website.
yeah. So we talked a little bit about managing pressure and anxiety and how important that was. I think probably people, year six teachers at this time of year might be most concerned about those children who are currently below the expected standard and how that we can get them ready without totally overwhelming them. How would you manage that?
I suppose that the thing to bear in mind is that what we're trying to do is make sure all children have got uh, a good journey towards the SATs, and that they're feeling confident about it, and that that they all feel that they're able to take part in what is, if they want to, in what is a sort of landmark for many of them in their education. SATs week for us used to be a sort of special week because you do the children would come into school in the morning, we would have a bit of breakfast or a biscuit or something like that, and then in the afternoon there was often extended break times and things. So it was in terms of managing that well-being, it was a little bit of an event, I suppose. Um, and so you wanted everybody to join in on that. Now, we know for some children, they are not working at the level of the test. And if they're not working at the level of the test, then they shouldn't probably be entered for the test. However, we still had some children who weren't entered for the test, but they still had a go with their peers. We just didn't submit those papers,
Yeah.
if you know what I mean. For children who are just working below currently, though, who you feel that they have actually got an opportunity, maybe it's test technique, maybe it's, that they're just a little bit below where you would like them to be, but there's opportunity hopefully to get them there. I think you have to look at some additional time outside of the lessons, because again, you don't want them to be missing the core content, do you, that you're teaching in your lessons every day. But equally, you do need to give them some extra to help them to close those gaps. So we used to, and again, schools do this in different ways. It depends very much on the size of your school and the staff capacity and things like that. But we used to run boosters uh, for about an hour once a week after school from about February onwards, I think. And it would be very structured. And again, we'd make it a nice thing to come to. There would be snacks, there would be drinks. It was, the same night every week. They were targeted. We did try and do it for a couple of years where we opened it up to everybody and had a greater depth one and things as well, but it became quite difficult to manage that with 60 children and staff and things like that. But I think, I don't know about you, Becky, but in my experience, that did have a positive impact. And we would look very much at, for those children, you need to know what the gaps are. And we tried to identify those as much as we could and then group them. So we'd have 3 or 4 groups, group them according to their gaps, whether their need was number sense or arithmetic or whatever, and we could spend time addressing those. Or if it was on the reasoning side of things, was it about word problems, was it language, was it the diagram, what was it exactly, and try and group them as much as possible. And then we'd have a structured program that would take them through that, and that was something that we very much tailored to those pupils in particular. I know that's not possible for every school, unfortunately, but I do think that where it is, then it's definitely worth doing. Again, though, trying not to put too much pressure on and making it, all about passing the SAT. So when I first started doing it, we set it up as Mr. Cripwell's Maths Club, and certain people were invited, and we didn't call it boosters and things. That sort of tailed off a little bit. Children aren't daft; they know what's on the horizon. But I think anything that you can do to make it a bit more fun and not too much like their maths lesson, because if you're in that group, you're there because you're finding maths tricky. the last thing you probably want to do is more maths after school in your own time, don't you? So there needs to be
Yeah.
some sort of incentive for me, and to try and take that pressure away a little bit. But at the same time, if if you do want to help them to be secondary ready as well as for their tests, then I think finding some time outside of the main maths lesson is the main thing. And after
Yeah.
school just meant that it wasn't impacting on any other area of the curriculum, because we don't want to do that either.
Yeah, I think that's important, isn't it? Interesting that you said after school. We used to do some before school as well, but I think there probably are still schools that might do it within the school day. But the children who might be finding math difficult might be the ones that really need that hour of music so they can really succeed at something. So uh, yeah, and I think it can be a very bringing together of the school community, can't it? Like you said before, often other teachers are brought in and everyone's sort of in it together. It quite interesting. I think most schools do it this way, where they might have those year six boosters, interventions, whatever you want to call them, and then once the SATs are done, that that time or that effort is put into year five. However, you mentioned secondary readiness, John, and I think it's quite important that we don't forget that the journey doesn't finish with the tests, but they're going to have to go to secondary school in September. And we want them to be as ready as possible. So if being able to continue some kind of support after those tests is probably quite a good thing too.
And also, in terms of I think that's a really good point, Becky. And in terms of the year fives, if you've got the capacity to do something with year five, I think that's brilliant. As with any other year group, I think we just need to be careful that we're not already putting pressure on year five for, you've got these tests next year and you're already behind and we want to boot. I suppose it's just how it's managed. And I'm sure there's no school saying that. But again, they're not daft and they will pick up on things. So I'd be interested to see how that's managed so that those children feel secure and comfortable and confident, because that's what we want. We want to build confidence, don't we? And
Yeah.
everything that we're doing should be about building that confidence rather than diminishing it, I think.
So you've shared loads of things, John, that you've done over time, and you've obviously had lots of experience. Is there anything that you would advise maybe a less experienced year six teacher to either focus on or avoid? Maybe something that you think was going to be a good idea, which didn't have quite the impact you wanted, or vice versa?
For a less experienced year six teacher, if it's your first time in year six, I would definitely have a go at the papers yourself first. So, and it sounds daft. Do it at the same time as the children if you want to, but making sure that you are really familiar with them yourself is really important, I would suggest. Um, the other thing maybe not to do is kind of weekly reasoning tests, and I don't think spending too much time on those things is helpful. I think making sure that they're planned in so that you're doing them, whether that's fortnightly or 3 weekly, twice a half term, once a half term, whatever it looks like. You need to measure as you go to make sure what you're doing is working so that you can change it. But I think if you're doing it too often, then that's just not helpful. I used to send maths papers home for parents. I stopped doing that as a blanket approach because for some pupils that caused issues actually for them at home. So what I would do is, if parents are asked to see the papers because the pupil had come home and said, I didn't do very well today or whatever, then I would send the papers, but I would also say, have a phone call or catch them on the gate or whatever to say, 9 times out of 10, what I'll be saying is, do you know what? Actually, they did really well for them, and I'm really pleased with this. This is the bit that I want them to work on next, so that it's not just sitting in front of a paper and being made to do more of the same at home, because I don't think that's necessarily helpful. So parental engagement is really important, and keeping parents aware along the way without doing 30 parents' evenings a year is really important. Um, Again, going back to those pupils that you're focusing on, I think bringing parents on board to support with that, but being really, really clear with them of what your expectations are and what would be useful to do rather than just doing more practice. That's not necessarily going to help. What about yourself, Becky? Have you any advice that you would give to a less experienced year six teacher or somebody new to year six?
I think from now up to the tests can be quite a stressful time, can't it? I think not only are you getting ready for the test, but you've also probably got some other things that you have to do after that you're starting to think about. More fun things, maybe productions and end of year assemblies and things, but it can feel extremely overwhelming. I think, though, I mean, it would be quite unusual for you to have nobody in your school who had experience of year six. So reach out, speak to people, ask people's advice. Certainly, SLT would probably have some experience. I think just try and share the load. As you mentioned at the very top of the interview, John, it's not just about year six. And I think actually only 40% or something of the content of the tests is year six content. So it is a culmination of everybody. And if you can
It's
share
certainly
some of
possible
that.
to reach age expected expectations without doing any year six content at all.
Yeah.
No.
So I think that, and I think generally schools do share that message. And I think it can be quite lonely, depending on the size of your school. It can feel like it's all on you, but reach out and share that load, because actually you may be the one that's delivering the tests, but the work has been a culmination of a lot of people's efforts. And I think most
Yes.
people would want to be involved if they could. So I think reach out and talk about it. Ask for help if you need it is probably my biggest piece of advice.
Want to have a very quick conversation, Becky, about greater depth, if that's okay, because that's the other end of the sort of spectrum, isn't it? And what does greater depth mean in terms of year six attainment? Because I think often when we talk about greater depth, when we're talking about lesson planning or we're talking about questioning or activity design, we're thinking about how do we deepen understanding without necessarily moving into a new domain or new content. But in terms of the SATs, it doesn't really mean that, does it? That there isn't another, we mentioned earlier the level 6 paper that used to be in the old system, that there was actually a greater depth paper called the level 6 paper, which was a completely different paper with different content in and things. Now all the pupils get exactly the same paper. The questions are all Key Stage 2 questions. That there's no difference. All it's about is being accurate and quick enough, isn't it,
Yeah.
to answer all of them and get enough of them correct. I'm wondering, is that really greater depth?
I don't think it is, actually. I think there are a few questions, and we get them every year, and there's a sort of a new sort of diagram will appear that no one has ever seen before. They're just presenting the maths in a different way. And
Yes.
what that's really testing is a conceptual understanding, which we talk about a lot, don't we, on the podcast, and how important it is. And I think those sorts of questions probably are challenging a little bit more of that deeper understanding. But I think you're right. I think actually you could achieve a greater depth standard just by being accurate and quick.
And it makes sense, doesn't it, that you would expect those children who are working at that higher or that deeper understanding, who have a better conceptual understanding, that they would be able to answer all of the questions more quickly and more accurately and get a high percentage of them correct. That does make sense. But I suppose my point is that you don't need to necessarily do anything hugely different for those children to enable them to, again, it's not like the level 6 paper where you would have had to teach a different curriculum to, for some of those children. Um, Here it's about teaching the same content and just making sure that they have a deep enough understanding. The diagram thing, I remember a few years ago after a SATs paper, a child saying that they'd never seen a diagram like that before. And it was just a bar chart that was horizontal rather than vertical. Do you know, that was on me. I just thought at the time, you're right. Why do we always show bar charts in that particular way? What's wrong with showing them in a slightly different way? But little things like that can throw them, which is why we talk about variation, the importance of variation, and non-examples and things, and dare I say it, inverted commas here, upside down triangles and things. You know, it's important, isn't it, that we don't always show a blue triangle in a particular orientation. We need to show lots of different variations of a concept so that we're not getting tripped up by a horizontal bar chart. Well, I think that's probably just about everything that we can offer in terms of preparing for SATs, Becky. Do we have Twinkle? I know the answer to this, but I'll just set you up with it anyway. Do we have any particular resources that you might recommend for Year 6 teachers at this stage? Because it might be interesting for us to come back actually to SATs maybe in April or towards the end of April, just before SATs week, to talk about last minute things. But in terms of building up, I think we've probably covered most things now. But are there any particular resources on the Twinkle website that we could direct people towards who might find that useful at the moment?
Yes. So we have what's called the SAT Survival Hub, which is not just maths, but it's across the board. So if you search for that on the Twinkle website, that will take you to a landing page which has a whole host of resources, including things like revision timetables. Might just be helpful if you want help organising that. We also have, I think you mentioned before, lots of tests and half tests, which can be used instead of past papers to give you an idea and help you with a little bit of question level analysis. We also have some specific SATs questions in specific areas. So you could find a set of questions specifically on algebra or specifically on adding and subtracting fractions, for example. One of my favorite, and we've mentioned this before, my favorite resources is the concept videos. So if there is an area that you might be struggling with and you need a group to go and have a little separate intervention, you don't have another pair of hands, concept video can be a perfect way to access that. And those are also very closely linked to our study squad workbooks, which are printable, which have lots of brain breaks and things through them as well, which are quite a nice resource. And we mentioned the importance of interventions. We do have a 6-week intervention program already planned for maths, which you can find on that SAT Survival Hub as well.
Yep, and I have used that in the wild, Becky, and found it very useful. As with anything, I think it's worth saying that these things can be adapted, and that they need to be adapted for
Yeah.
your own pupils, your own class. But in terms of a starting point, I think they're absolutely fantastic and well worth having a little look at. Now, I'm sure if you have been listening up to this point, you've been probably thinking to yourself or shouting at your listening device of choice that why haven't you mentioned X, Y, or Z that we do at our school, because it's really useful. We would love to have any tips that you would be happy to share with other Year 6 teachers or other maths leads or other people who are running intervention groups. Anything that you have found works really, really well in your school to support pupils in the run-up to SATs week. We would love to hear them, and we will share them, Becky, in our Aftermaths episode, which will be released on Friday. I don't know whether we'll do it in this week's Aftermaths episode, but probably in one of the Aftermaths episodes coming up. So you just have to listen to all of them to get those top tips. But yeah, if you do have any, then do email us at primarymathspodcast@twinkle.co.uk. That's twinkle without an E. Or leave us a comment on YouTube in the YouTube video comment section. And we will obviously credit you with that idea, but you'll get to share it with lots of other people who will benefit from it as well.
Yeah, please do get in touch. I think the teaching community is so supportive, and I think having as many ideas as possible can only be helpful. So please do share if you've thought something that we haven't mentioned today.
Absolutely. We hope that you have found this episode particularly useful if you are preparing children for those end of Key Stage 2 tests. If that is the case, good luck. There are, as we said, loads of resources on the Twinkle website that can help you. But as Becky said as well, just all around the internet, the teaching community is fantastic in terms of supporting one another. And as Becky alluded to as well, if you are new to Year 6, there are, I'm sure, experienced teachers in your school that have been through this process before in your shoes. So do reach out to them as well, or if not in your school, then certainly in the local area or your trust. So yeah, just don't be afraid to ask for some help and guidance, I guess. Becky and I will be back on Friday with another After Maths episode, so please do join us for that. But otherwise, thank you so much, Becky, for joining me for this special interview episode. It's been a pleasure to have you along, as always.
Thank you, John. I enjoyed asking the questions. It was good. Thank you.
Yeah, I kind of enjoyed answering them. I probably just waffled on as per usual. But thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for listening. Do be in touch with your ideas and tips or anything that you want to ask us. And we will see you on Friday in our Aftermaths episode. Thank you very much. Have a good week.
Bye for now.